Hey guys, good afternoon. Brett here, directors. Thank you for joining today's live. So today wanted to talk on condos, but more specifically HOA dues, homeowners associations, kind of things to consider as you're looking at a potential condo or property with HOA, kind of all the ins and outs. So first off, guys, an HOA stands for homeowners association. So you're normally going to associate this with, say, condos. But there's a lot of properties, even, my house, single family home, there's an HOA, for the community. Now, in that case, the dues are very, very small. There's very little restrictions to it. But I think a lot of properties have some form of HOA. So a lot of you may have heard, oh, it's a bad thing. It's restrictive. It's concerning. Well, there's two sides to it as always. It's important to understand it. But the idea of a lot of HOA is to, hey, we want to have some consistency of the community. Sometimes there's these older area properties with no HOA. You might get the neighbor that paints their house bright pink and purple, right? And that's okay, but sometimes you get too many unique things. Or unfortunately, you have the neighbor that just doesn't take care of their home and gets into disrepair, or the guy that's got, blue tarps all over. So whatever it may be, at some point that could affect, you living there, but also the resale value. So HOAs are typically intended to have some consistency and help out. Now, more specifically to condos, HOA is going to be a higher amount normally on an HOA due, but it's going to include certain things. Oftentimes we see water, sewer, garbage, occasionally like, local security, local maintenance for the common grounds, maybe even internet. So sometimes some of your utilities are built into these HOAs because they're paid on a community basis versus individually. So how to really look at this. So let's start first of just the HOA in general. When you go to buy a property, specifically a condo, you're going to get an HOA resale certificate. And that's going to give you a lot of information about the community and the HOA, the health, the dues, the cost, all the above. Now, as a lender on a condo, we will look at that too, because we want to make sure as we're lending that we feel comfortable, but it's also a service we help with is to evaluate that and help communicate with our clients. So some of the things we would want to look through as well as for you guys is first restrictions. Is there anything super unique? Sometimes you'll see ones that say, hey, we're restricting what size pets you can have, or we're restricting you can't have an AC unit because it hangs off the side of the building, or you can't have a satellite dish. So whatever they may be, there are going to be some restrictions sometimes. Now, again, those don't always have to be bad. I think it's just important that you know those and say, hey, is that okay for me? Do I feel comfortable with that? The other flip side of any time we're thinking about that is, well, when I eventually go to sell this property, is that going to be difficult or limit the buyer pool and make this tougher to sell? So one thing to consider. Now, the other aspects of the HOA is just the health of it. And what I mean by that is, what are the reserves look like? Meaning, okay, how much money does the HOA have? Inevitably, repairs are going to be needed at some point. We need new siding. We need to paint. We need to update the driveways. We need to do a roof. Now, if a HOA budgets properly, they're taking part of that HOA due every month from every unit, compiling the reserves to be ready for when something needs replacement. Now, if I see something with very, very low reserves, I am concerned that when something happens like a roof replacement, they're going to do a special assessment to add additional dues. So that's something we want to avoid. Now, we can all never know the future, but again, if you have a healthy, well-managed HOA, they're collecting dues, we can look at the delinquency ratio, how many units in the complex are actually paying their dues on time. That gives us some details. But again, seeing what the reserves are their funds ready for when those inevitable expenses come up in the future? So that's a few things we want to look at as both a lender and as a buyer to understand it. Now, the next piece should be is, what is that monthly payment for HOAs? Now, I am always cautious to compare, hey, what's a single family home cost versus a condo with HOA? Yes, they're both your total payment. But remember, the HOA is probably going to include a couple of utilities that would not be over here. So I think if you had two options and the condo with that HOA is a little bit more expensive, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a worse deal if it's including XYZ utilities. So I think it's just good to look through that and really understand, what do my dues cover? For example, typically on a condo, a lot of the homeowner's insurance is included in that. You may get a supplemental insurance policy, but it might be very, very small because the majority of coverage is built into the dues. But I think looking at how much are the dues in general and what is everything that is included with those dues is a great starting point for us to see, okay, what are the different things it covers? Now, from a loan qualifying standpoint, we do have to count the HOA dues as part of your qualifying. So apples to apples, oftentimes, if we're looking at a $500,000 home approval, it may be a little bit lower, 450,000 condo approval, depending on the dues. Now, that's something we can all help to go through and evaluate for you, but just to keep in mind on that. So those are some of the kind of key pieces to look for us. Now, the other piece for us you can look at is potentially what kind of engagement do we see from the HOA? And what I mean by this is, how many people are members? Do a lot of people come to the meetings? Because typically, if you see a better managed or more congruent HOA kind of community, you'll have a better run association, better reserves, all of the above. And I think these things, again, come in play of, one, the ability for you to enjoy this property as you live there. But secondly, as you go to sell this down the road, are there anything working against us that may turn off buyers or limit the buyer pool that's coming to you and therefore affect value in some way? So I hope that was helpful, guys. If there's any questions or specifics you want to talk on, such as special assessments, what those mean, feel free to reach out. Happy to chat through them at any point and talk in detail.